Thank you. Well, we've cleared the decks on Sunday Supplement this morning. We're dedicating almost all of the programme to the Ynys Môn by-election, and I'm pleased to say that all 6 candidates are joining me here for around about 45 minutes of debate and discussion. Now, we'll go to them in various orders, but just out of fairness, we drew the names out of the hat for the first question, and I want to start, gentlemen, with an issue that you've all said is one of the most important ones, if not the most important one, in the by-election, which is jobs. We've seen numerous jobs blows on Anglesey over recent years. Tal Michael, if I could begin with you. Tal Michael is the Labour candidate. I'll introduce you as we go along rather than doing a long list. Jobs is the issue, but your party's been in power now in Cardiff Bay and was in power in Westminster for a very long time. You can't suddenly say this is a crisis that's nothing to do with you, can you?
Well, no, but the issue is how we responded to the international banking crisis from 2007 onwards. And what we've had since 2010 is that the growth which was starting to be established in the economy has been removed from it. So we've got an economy which is flatlining. We've had significant cuts in public services with more on the way. And what those have done is actually, they haven't caused the deficit to go down because we've got more people out of work.
Sure, those are Westminster issues, though, and this is an Assembly by-election, and in Wales, your party is in power.
Indeed, but I think actually it's very obvious that the main issues around the economy are much wider than Anglesey and indeed Wales. Actually, they're at UK level and indeed at EU level. And what we need to see, and I think what voters are looking for, is to see concerted action to ensure that we are getting more people in jobs across Europe.
All right, well, let's talk about the concerted action. If you were elected as an Assembly member, you would give Cadwyn Jones a majority government in Cardiff Bay. What would that government deliver in terms of jobs for Ynys Môn?
Well, some of that is carrying on with the work which has been done. I mean, one of the key things is to make sure that the million young people we've got across the UK are able to get into work. So in terms of those in Wales, we've got a much more effective Jobs Growth Wales programme than what's happening over the border. We've had 7,000 job opportunities to help young people into work, and I think that's really important. The most important issue, of course, for Anglesey itself is Wilver B, as that is the largest project, not just in the island, but in Wales.
Well, we will come on to Wilver B immediately after that, but let's talk about the job scene more generally. Second up, Steve Churchman, who's the Welsh Liberal Democrat candidate. Steve, it is impossible, I know, to sort of hermetically seal off Westminster issues and Assembly issues, but this is an Assembly by-election. What more could the Welsh Government be doing to create jobs in Anglesey?
Well, there are a number of issues. I think you've got to consider the infrastructure is one of the major contributors, or should be, to improving the job situation. I think we need to see a partnership between the Welsh Government, between local authorities, housing associations and so on, to find the investment to build new properties. There is, of course, a housing shortage, so we are slipping onto another issue, of course, but I think this is one of the ways we can be seen to be creating employment locally, which will benefit not just people currently unemployed, but it will also help to support businesses that already exist in.
Investment in infrastructure, in housing, in roads, in schools, but, the Welsh Government would say, well, look, our hands are tied by a government up in Westminster in terms of what we have to spend, a government that your party is part of.
Yeah, but with regards to something like housing, it doesn't have to be money from the government. It can also be money from, say, housing associations. It's the sort of thing we do see on small scale throughout Wales, throughout this part of Wales, when housing developments are created. That's the type of thing I think we do need to encourage.
Rhun ap Iorwerth is the Plaid Cymru candidate. Your predecessor as Plaid Cymru candidate on Anglesey was the Minister responsible for industry. You can't wash your hands of the situation on the island either.
No, but we can point to things that Plaid Cymru have done, looking back at when Plaid Cymru was in government, but also where we've managed to get deals out of budget settlements in recent years, which are really making a difference. Nobody so far has mentioned the word skills, because if we're going to be attracting jobs to Anglesey and attracting investment into Anglesey, we want to make sure that our young people have the right skill sets in order to provide business with what they need. And in a recent budget deal, we managed to ensure there were 5,000 extra apprentices. And we know from speaking to people in Coleg Menai and apprentices who have actually taken up placements now, that is what they feel too Anglesey needs to do in terms of just making sure we have the right tools at hand to bring in jobs.
Right, I'm going to come back to you, Rhyn, because it sounds to me like there might be a slight microphone problem. People will have heard that, but it didn't sound brilliant, I suspect. Let me go to Catherine Jones from the Socialist Labour Party. Good morning to you. Jobs. What would you do on jobs?
Well, I have spoken as strongly as I can during the hustings and during the course of this campaign that we need to go beyond the need for private investment. We need to go to public investment, and I haven't heard this from from any of the candidates. We need. If I was elected to the Assembly, I would oppose public subsidies going to private companies who take the money and then relocate. I think that's a huge issue, and even in a smaller party without any kind of majority in the Assembly, that's something that I really could do, because I think a lot of this is about the will to argue for the change that's needed. And I think if there's no argument being made for public investment by any of the other parties, which I don't see, then that argument, right, not only is it not being made in Westminster, it's not being made in the Assembly either.
Would you, Rhyn, coming back to you, I think we've solved that. If there was a problem, we've solved it. Greater public investment. I mean, are there ways the Welsh Government could work smarter within the constraints that it has in terms of what it's getting from Westminster?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's about using influence, a lot of it, isn't it? And I know we'll come on to Wilva again, which will be a huge private investment, but where we can, in the public sector, work closely with them and try to see that those kind of developments work with the benefits of Anglesey at their hearts. But again, coming back to apprentices, that's the kind of thing where the public purse can chip in, but ultimately you're working with the private sector who want to take apprentices on and so on. But there are other things that we can do that doesn't mean pumping new money in. For example, making sure you have more local contracts for local companies, increasing, as Plaid Cymru did in government, the number of contracts in the public sector that actually go to companies here in Wales, keeping money in the system, employing our young people.
Neil Fairlam, there's the Conservative candidate on Anglesey. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Jobs.
The specific character of Anglesey is focused and local and specific, and the huge potential of Wilva shouldn't obscure that. To give you an example, I was on Friday at the Oyster Catcher restaurant in Rosniger, where the Timpson family, of course, private enterprise in the shoe business, have a restaurant which takes on 16 people a year, 16 young people, to train them and to mentor them and to give them a start in the catering industry. Some of these young people also, it's well known, have had legal and personal problems in their past. It's a second chance for some of them. This is personal enterprise, as opposed to what Catherine has condemned, with a social responsibility. And there are lots of good examples of this.
Do you think there's been a problem in Anglesey in the past, and maybe others would like to come in on this, that as an island it's been too dependent on a few large employers? I'm thinking of the hundreds who've lost their job recently in Gaerwen, Anglesey Aluminium before then, that they've been great jobs, good jobs, which people were very glad to get in Anglesey Aluminium, but when it went, it was a disaster.
Well, there are so many small businesses on Anglesey that if they can find their place in the niche market, like Hallenmore, Anglesey Sea Salt, like Hootens in Bryn Shenkin, these are the specific businesses that have added value to their product, have a definite, specific place in the market. But, Rhyn is quite right, we need skills for our young people. I was a teacher for 20 years, and I'm sorry to say our children are often being sold short, coming out of school without the skills that specific employers want.
I don't condemn, a statement has been made, I absolutely do not condemn social enterprises, but if I was in the Assembly, I would argue for public subsidies to go directly into local employment projects and social enterprises.
Lovely. We have one candidate left. Nathan Gill from UKIP. I'm sorry that you had the bad luck to be the last out of the hat.
Okay.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you very much for coming in. Jobs. UKIP's prescription for jobs.
Catherine just mentioned about, getting subsidies directly for employment. One of the things is that over the last few years, we have had a Labour government in Cardiff. We've had a Labour MP and Plaid AM. Yet we discovered that just since 2011, there's been an £18 million Welsh Development Fund, and Anglesey hasn't had a penny of
that's
this
because
money.
no one applied for it, isn't it?
Is it not
well,
the job of the AM to actually let the people know that this is available and help them to fill in the applications and make sure that local businesses actually get it?
So
I've spoken to businesses.
the businesses that actually have
well,
applied for that
I've
money.
spoken to businesses on the island, and a lot of them didn't even know that there was such a fund. We've got to wean ourselves as a nation away from public sector jobs. We must encourage small and medium businesses through rate reliefs, grants, and by cutting red tape.
Can I ask you one thing on jobs, specifically from the point of view of Holyhead and UKIP's position on the UK's withdrawal from the European Union? I mean, there will be people who say, well, you know, the whole reason for Holyhead is Dublin, if you like. I mean, withdrawal from the European Union might look pretty scary to some people who depend on that trade.
Not at all, because people are not going to stop trading with us. Germany are not going to stop selling us their BMWs and Mercedes, are they? We will continue to trade with our European partners and friends, but we just don't need them to actually govern us. We do not need a political union. It was supposed to be an economic union. That's what we joined in 1973.
Let's move on to Willoughby, because I know it's not directly an assembly issue, but it kind of affects everyone, doesn't it? It affects the council, it affects AMs and so on. Freen. You and your predecessor have been in a position where, well, spell it out for us.
Well, it's quite simple. We know that energy isn't devolved. Therefore, Westminster is taking the decision on the future of Willoughby. So that's the situation we're living in. But what is devolved on, as you know very well, is economic development. So what we want to do is to use all the tools at our disposal to make sure that we're able to make sure that Willoughby works for the benefit of the people of Anglesey. Because I see other parties saying, come in and do what you like, put your pylons up, bury the waste there, whatever. We're saying, let's support it and support it responsibly, because what we need is to make sure that when Wilva comes, we have the right people to fill the right jobs. And when I speak to young apprentices at Wilva, as I did last week, you know, they're excited about the possibility for them on the island, and we share that excitement on their behalf, whilst at the same time taking the responsible approach and saying, let's make it happen for the benefit of the people of Anglesey and its community.
Right, but to be clear, Plaid Cymru wants decisions over power stations to be devolved. If Willoughby was on the table in the Assembly, and I mean, I know it'd be a government decision rather than an Assembly decision, but let's put it in a situation, if you had to vote yes or no Willoughby, which would you vote?
Well, I'm being quite clear, and I can't make it any clearer. You know, I'm saying yes to Willoughby. I cannot make it clearer in that.
Because your party doesn't say that, does it?
But Plaid Cymru is a party, unlike many of the other parties now, that actually discusses decisions and decides what's best for Wales. I mean, you know that there's been a policy in Plaid Cymru going back 40 years where we've said develop nuclear power stations on the sites where there are nuclear power stations in the past. You know, it's nothing new for a member of Plaid Cymru and somebody who wants to be an elected member for Plaid Cymru to say, let's support the continuation of nuclear power generation on a site where that has been happening for decades.
I'm sorry, but it does sound an awful lot like sort of having your cake in Dwyford Meirionydd and Ynys Môn and eating it elsewhere.
Yeah, but we can discuss hypotheticals as much as you like, but we've got to discuss the situation we're in now. And what I've got to do, or what I would do as an Assembly member for Anglesey, is use the influence that I would have within the parameters that have been laid out now. And that means Wilva happening, decided on by a government in London, but delivered here in Anglesey. And the last thing we should do is just step back and let it happen without us making sure that the people of Anglesey are at the heart of this development. And that's what we intend to do. And our support for it in those terms are very, very clear.
Steve Churchman, am I right in thinking that you're a bit at variance with your party on Willoughby as well?
Not at all. My party is anti-nuclear, and that is my position, because I don't think that this is going to deliver the jobs that we're being told it's going to deliver to local people. You're going to require a huge number of people to come into the area.
It's the Westminster government, which you're a part of, which is bringing forward.
Well, it's the government that's bringing it forward. My party actually is opposed to nuclear power. That was our manifesto position.
But it wasn't a line in the sand when it came to the coalition negotiation.
Well, with the problem with any coalition agreement is you have to have compromises, and that's one of the issues that has sadly been compromised on. I think you have to consider that there are also awful lot of issues around Wilverby. As I say, employment. We haven't got the guarantee it's going to create the employment for local people. I fear it's going to bring people into the area, which will undermine the communities on the island. Yes, there will be some jobs, of course, but I think that we should be looking at alternatives. You have got to consider, you put all your eggs in one basket, you drop that basket, what happens? What happens now if Wilverby isn't developed? We've missed the boat with the potential of developing alternative means of producing energy from Energy Island.
Tell Michael, is it a problem that, really the question I asked to Neil earlier, that Anglesey is looking for salvation in a mega project, and Anglesea's had mega projects before, and whether it's good or bad, that actually it may take the eye of people off the ball from other things.
Well, I think what we need to do in the next phase is to make sure that Wilverby is a catalyst. We need to make sure that it happens, and we need to make sure that the way it's implemented is of benefit to local people, and that people are getting the training and the opportunity to go for jobs, so that most of those jobs can come from the island. And the estimates are that 60% can. There are, of course, a lot of people who've moved away from the island because of lack of job opportunities. It's history of many families, including my own, that people have gone elsewhere for work. And therefore, actually, some of the people who are coming back, I think, will have very strong roots with the island and will want to take up those opportunities. I think it's really important that we do have clarity at the Welsh level about whether or not there is support for the project. And I have to say, Freen is being disingenuous because his party is very clear that they are against it. And what we face, potentially, we've just heard Plaid Cymru and Liberal Democrats both against, both have agreed to work together. We could well have a situation where those two parties are trying to hold Welsh Labour over a barrel and saying that they will try and prevent this project. And, for Freen to then say, oh, well, if he's elected, he's in favour, but he will be part of a party which is very clearly against. Yeah. And at the hustings the other night, he was asked a very direct question as to whether he would lobby his party to change policy, and he declined to answer the question.
Come back on that briefly, and then I have to go to the others.
I'll gladly answer that question. And, we've had this debate within Plaid Cymru for many years. I'll happily have that debate within Plaid Cymru again in future years about the policy of nuclear power. We're talking about Wilverby here, and one thing, I'm sure you'd agree there are more people who are anti-nuclear power within the Labour Party than there are within Plaid Cymru.
And you've got lots more members than you,
but you've had working on your campaign here at Nia Griffith, for example, the MP who's been a leading light in anti-nuclear power. I'm sure you're not shutting her up and telling her not to take part in your campaign. Let's be adult about this and accept that nuclear power. Let's be adult and accept that nuclear power is. Excuse me, Tal. Let's be adult about this and agree that nuclear power is one of those things that does divide opinion. It's important that we have debates on all the issues involved with Wilverby, but in our case, it's making sure we get the right jobs for our young people.
I was certain we were going to have that debate between Tal and Reen, so I let it run a little bit, which means that three of you have been slightly excluded, so we'll come to you now. Catherine, if I can come to you first. Your position on Wilverby?
Well, I'm standing for the Socialist Labour Party, and our position is very clear on Wilverby. We have a clear anti-nuclear policy, and unlike the Liberal Democrats, we would not go into a coalition with a pro-nuclear party and have our policy absorbed into their policy and not have a voice in Westminster against it or a voice in the Assembly against it. We are strongly opposed to the storing of highly radioactive waste for up to 150 years on the site without being moved, which is part of the plan. The very notion itself should warn us of timescales beyond human norms with the most dangerous man-made substances. There's also a connection between Wilver A and the production of plutonium for nuclear weapons. And there's a very important study. The Health Protection Agency in 2010 reported to government, and they wrote, a recent study referred to as the KIC study reported a statistically significantly increased risk of leukemia amongst children less than 5 years of age living within 5 kilometres proximity of nuclear power plants in Germany from 1980 to 2003. Germany abandoned, after Fukushima, Germany abandoned nuclear power. If they can do it, why can't we?
Neil Phelan, it is a point, isn't it, that in other parts of the world, people are moving away from nuclear. You know, any energy technology you look at, be it wind, wave, or whatever, there are pluses and minuses. There are people who are passionate for, passionate against.
But this is not a debating society. Irene says, let us be adult. Well, I loved school debating, but we are not debating. We are actually deciding the lives of many people. And if I may say this on a Sunday, the party and the candidate should sing from the same hymn sheet. Hitachi are the people who are going to put up the money for this project to take it to the stage when they will be looking for substantial investment. And both they and their potential future supporters do not want an assembly member with a contradictory message to the party. They want a clear signal of support, which the Conservatives and Labour have both given on this issue.
And UKIP.
And UKIP as well. Thank you very much. We do see nuclear as part of a very sensible energy mix. However, I just feel that Plaid and Labour have both been very disingenuous. I've been on the campaign trail and I've been to Hustings, and we just heard from Tal about how they think that 60% of jobs for the construction and for the long-term Wilver project will be local. Well, this just isn't the fact. We know from experience that these are hollow promises. As an example is the construction of the Uskmouth power station in Newport, where the president of the local G&B Boilermakers branch is actually a UKIP county councillor. His branch members had to stand by as seamen shipped in, busload after busload of foreign workers. You cannot force, because of EU law, construction or any large project to employ locally. There's no such thing as British jobs for British workers in the EU. It does not exist.
Tal, you wanted to come in briefly and then I want to move on.
Yes, absolutely. There is work that you can do on this, and I've got experience of delivering on this in the past. What you have to do is to make sure that you put obligations on the companies to advertise jobs locally and to provide training opportunities locally. If you do those two things, then it is in the company's interest to use the people who have been trained and have been taken on locally, and that means that you can deliver it. Now, the figure of 60% comes from independent surveys. I actually think that with the proper work that we can do, we can push that above that. And the other thing which I think is really important is actually, I mentioned using it as a catalyst. There are lots of other energy projects. What we want to do is to make sure that Ynys Môn has a reputation as somewhere where there are highly qualified people and therefore attract other companies, and that's how we avoid the situation of all eggs in one basket.
Yeah. Nathan first, and then Pete, and then we have to move on.
We've known for years that the current Wilver was going to shut down. We needed apprenticeships years ago to train people up to take up these jobs when they come. What's the point of negotiating with Hitachi that we're going to have 100 local welders when we've only got 50 people who are actually trained? Where are the apprenticeships now? We need them en masse, not just small projects, Ian. We need large projects.
Yeah, well, you clearly haven't been to the state-of-the-art welding centre that they've got at the Coleg Menai in Llangefni, but I just wanted to make one point about the kind of jobs we're talking about here. Labour go on about the 6,000 jobs. I'd much rather, and the people of Anglesey would much rather talk about the 500, maybe 600 jobs that could be there for generations. We shouldn't be pulling the wool over the eyes of the people of Anglesey. It's those jobs that are important in the long term.
I do want to move on, but I'm aware that Catherine and Steve have been trying to come back in, so out of it, if you can keep it as briefly as possible.
At Hustings in Llanfaithley, there was a very good contribution from the audience, and a man said, and this is true, that there is a lot of work in decommissioning Wilver A, that there are a lot of jobs, and there's also work with the Celtic sea turbines.
This is the offshore wind farm.
Yes, and that's virtually on stream, or will be very soon.
Steve, very quickly, please.
Yeah, again, it's a point that's just been raised there about Wilver A. I mean, Wilver A's on borrowed time. We've lost a lot of time in planning for the future.
Yes.
We've been sort of navel gazing, if you understand. Instead of getting on with the job in hand,
debating.
We should have had this debate years ago. It's no good waiting for Wilver to be on borrowed time before deciding, are we going to go nuclear or are there alternatives? This should have happened years ago.
Right, I want to move on to an issue that is solely the responsibility of the Welsh Government, and it's an issue that's been leading the news for weeks, if not months now, which is the state of the Welsh Health Service. We've seen stories this week from South Wales, from the University Hospital of Wales, but we've also seen travails of Betsy Cadwaladr, a health board responsible for health in this part of Wales, talk of the mortality statistics at Ysbyty Gwynedd, the main hospital which serves the island of Anglesey, even though it's on the mainland side of the Menai. Neil, if I can begin with you here, how big an issue are you finding health on the doorstep? Because your party has been pushing this very hard in the Assembly, 180 miles away.
Yes, because of the cuts, the real cuts of up to £800 million in real terms over the next few years, and the annual scramble to balance the budget. At the same time, we recognise that a lot of people are very dedicated in the health services and the hospitals that in my work I visit several times a week. So we have a contrast between people's appreciation of the service they get, at the same time frustration at the longer waiting times and the wrong priorities in national health spending.
But your party has said in Cardiff Bay that it would ring-fence health.
Yes, indeed.
And what Labour turn around, and it appears the Liberal Democrats and Plaid actually agree with this, is they say, well, if you do that, that would mean the sort of cuts in education, in local authority spending, that would be absolutely draconian. It just can't be done.
It's a matter of priorities, and we've submitted figures that show it can, yes.
Well, have you? Those figures show a 20% cut in education. Do you really want to see a cut in 20% in education? You'll have to give me the quotation on that. But within the health spending, we want to concentrate on the priority for cancer treatments earlier than they are, because waiting lists, even as we spoke in the campaign in the hustings, are getting longer and longer. This is the wrong priorities in the health spending. Yes. Tal Michael, when you look at the sort of stories we've been seeing fairly regularly, and, you know, OK, some of these are political setups, but the Royal College of Surgeons, for instance, coming out with what it said about University Hospital of Wales, moving the services over the border to England. Are you proud of Welsh Labour's record on the health service?
Well, I'm very proud of the health service and the record of the people who are working in there. I think we've done fantastic.
That wasn't the question.
Well, no, but I think it's really important, actually, to be clear that most people who use the health service have a fantastically good experience. Yes, there are difficulties, but let's not get away from the fact that we have a health service which is there at the point of need for people. And actually what's happening over the border in England is they're dismembering their health service, and that's very serious. In terms of what we need to do here in Wales, I think there are two issues, one which is about funding and the other is about management. As you've already highlighted, if we were to put more money into the health service in Wales, we'd have to take that money out of other services. You've already heard from Shreen the pressure from Plaid Cymru in terms of apprenticeships. Well, I agree with that. Actually, the first priority of government at this point in time has to be around getting people into jobs, because that's how we grow the economy. There are other issues as well. You know, what's happened to local government in England is a 38% cut. Now, to think that that doesn't have a knock-on effect on the health service is entirely wrong, because there are two issues that come out of that. One is in terms of bed blocking. So actually, if you want to shift people out of hospital beds into care homes, you need to make sure that the funding is there for the care packages. And the second one is around prevention and making sure that you put the investment in, for example, to make sure that someone has a grab rail when they come out of hospital, rather than them falling over and hurting themselves.
But there's no sign that keeping councils or insulating councils to a degree, because they've had cuts, but to a degree more than England, has freed up space in the health service in Wales, is there? The problem is still there.
Well, we still have a problem. I mean, you know, I know from personal experience the support and help that we've had from the local council in terms of my mother-in-law coming out of hospital and making sure that we got the support there to enable her to resume living at home, and that's incredibly important. And I know that across the border in England, those services are incredibly overstretched.
There's a basic equation here that just isn't working. The headlines today, Betsy Cadwallader Health Board is facing a 29 million shortfall from April, and I would say, and our party would say, that a big part of this are the agreements to build hospitals and have equipment under private, something called private finance investment.
Very few of those in Wales. I think there's one in Port Talbot, and that's about it. I mean, it's not a huge problem, that, in Wales.
What, private finance investment? Well, I've seen a copy of budget accounts in which private finance, PFI, is definitely listed, and it's listed in terms of buildings and plant and equipment. So money is going out of Betsy Cadwallader Health Trust for PFI, and that means, you know, they're paying and paying and paying on these private agreements, and, you know, it's difficult to know how much money is going out every year, but I would say that is definitely a factor, and that is why the Assembly has given health boards not just a year to balance their accounts, but 3 years. Of course they can't do it.
I'm not sure to what extent PFI is a problem in Wales. Maybe one of you can help me on that. Nathan, where do you see this going? Because it's very easy for people to take a pop on health, isn't it? You know, the voters are quite conservative on health. Any changes are resisted. You know, there's easy votes to be earned on health, but difficult questions to be addressed.
Unfortunately, right now it's getting easier and easier because of all of the headlines that we've been seeing. And really, I'm not surprised that that Tal isn't willing to say how happy he is with his party's past experience and dealings with the health service in Wales, because quite frankly it's been an absolute disaster. I mean, we've seen that since they came to power, they took 5 health boards, created 22 separate health boards, then subsequently dismantled that, which left up to a dozen top NHS executives now without a portfolio, but with a guaranteed £100,000 per annum wage packet guaranteed for 10 years. We talk about funding priorities. We've seen nothing but poor choices with funding priorities.
Rhyn, Plaid Cymru is always eager to be on the barricades on health, but cynics might say that at times it's very easy for an opposition party to say, save our services, save our hospitals, when a government is actually trying to tackle genuine issues and genuine problems.
We know it's a balance. It's a fine balancing act, and it's going to become an even tougher balancing act in years to come between financial issues and the real needs of the patients. And the one thing I'm concerned about, and what people in Anglesey tell me they're concerned about, is that there seems to have been a loss of connection between the decision makers in health, be that in the Labour government, but also in terms of senior managers in the Betsy Cadwaladr Trust. And we need to make sure that when decisions have to be taken sometimes on cost grounds, that the needs of a particular area are considered properly. And I don't know how things are like in the part of Wales that Tal Michael lives in, for example, but on Anglesey, we're seeing a cut in services. We're seeing the threat of neonatal specialist services being moved further and further away, maybe 2 hours away from some people in the north of Anglesey. In these years post-devolution, decisions being taken with financial needs behind them, but clearly having forgotten what the patients in North Wales needs.
Steve, Karen Jones has a mantra on this, which is that services should be delivered as close to the individual as possible, so long as they're safe. I mean, no one can disagree with that, can they?
I don't think anyone can really disagree with that, and that to me shows, if anything, a lack of direction, because it's just a mantra at the end of the day, which no one is going to disagree with. I think you have to take the bull by the horns and say, well, look, what's wrong with the health service, what's right with the health service, and work to improve what's wrong. I mean, the idea of ring-fencing money, as the Conservatives are suggesting, to me is ludicrous. At the end of the day, it's no good just throwing more money at it or saying we're not going to cut it. What you've got to ensure is there's efficiency in the way the money is spent. We spend more money in healthcare in Wales than across the border in England per head, and the results, quite frankly, aren't as good. It is something wrong with the management structure, I believe, in the health service in Wales, and that needs to be sorted out very quick.
Nathan and then Tal.
Okay. Well, one of our policies is for directly elected health boards, where people are responsible to the people that elect them, and they need to make sure that they deliver. I mean, I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I can tell you I get the most amazing care from my local surgery in Llangefni. However, my mother in Menai Bridge is also diabetic, and the service that she gets is absolutely, it's like 10% of what I get. The people at the doorstep are concerned that we no longer have a national health service. It's been broken down between England and Wales, and arguing about how well we're doing here in Wales and how well people are getting in England, and yet we see Welsh servicemen who have been wounded having to move to England in order to get prosthetic limbs. It's disgusting.
But I don't believe your party would oppose the backdoor privatisation of the National Health Service. Would you?
I can tell you now that we will do what it takes in order to make sure that the service that the people get is the best service that they can receive.
Yeah, that's not answering my question.
Tal,
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with having direct elections for health any more than direct elections for police makes sense. And what we need to is actually have a joined-up approach. And there are so many issues here which cut across different services that what matters is how they work together. And that, of course, has been where there have been some failures and there are issues. But I think what we need to be clear about is how you address those management failures. I don't think it's about reorganisation. I think it's about what's been going on here, which is a bottom-up approach, which is based on what the clinicians are recommending in terms of how we go forward. That's very different from across the board where it's market. There have been failures, as you said right at the beginning, in terms of there being a disconnect between what's happening on the ward and what's happening in the boardroom. And that's why Mark Drakeford has taken clear action to make changes in Betsy, and we need to have new leadership, firm leadership, which is going to sort out that problem.
And at least now we know how bad things are. We can say stop the reorganisation and make the right decisions with the needs of people in North Wales and Anglesey at heart.
To be fair, Mark Drakeford has taken action because the reports were saying there was a risk, as distinct from saying that it's after the event.
And they still face a 29 million shortfall next April.
Right. As always, I had a whole list of subjects to cover, and as always, time is beating us. So I want to, if I may, finish off by giving each of you a chance to raise an issue that we haven't crossed, and there are some that were on the list and we just haven't reached. You can have one of those, or something that totally hasn't occurred to me. And we'll go around the table this way, I think. Crean, first of all.
Communications is one that we haven't talked about in terms of transport links. We need to press for the electrification of the North Wales rail line, which will soon be the only rail line in the UK that isn't electrified. We need to make sure that we also have the right transport links on road. We need to make sure that the logjam on the Britannia Bridge is sorted out, by reintroducing the feasibility study that Ian Wyn-Jones wanted and pressed for when he was in government for Plaid Cymru. But also in the digital age, we cannot have on the peripheries of Wales, a part of Wales which potentially is more dependent on broadband, somewhere which is clearly lagging behind. We have to make sure that the next generation of digital links connect us on Anglesey if we're to create jobs and bring in investment for the good of our young people.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you. Well, in direct answer to your question, on the doorstep, the majority of people, are bringing up with me the issues around immigration. And even though it's not a devolved area and it doesn't come under the Welsh Assembly government or this election, I'm actually quite surprised at how many people on the island, when we start speaking to them, immediately bring up about the fact that they're concerned about this open-door immigration policy which the current government, supported by Plaid Cymru and Labour and everybody else at this table, has. We have 1 million unemployed youth in this country. It's absolutely incredible that we've opened our doors to 500 million people who, if they choose to, can come here when, as I just said, we've got 1 million unemployed people. We have to do something about this.
Tal.
Well, I'd agree with Shreen in terms of the issues that he raised about communication. I'd add to that how we make sure that government engages with communities, and that's something where I've got lots of experience and would want to use that, both to improve the engagement of people of Ynys Môn with the Welsh Government, but also actually the Council, working with the Council to improve engagement, because I think there's a big issue there and lots of people disillusioned. And I disagree strongly with what Nathan is saying, because the issue at the end of the day that local people have is a lack of jobs and housing. And what people need to understand is that the reason there's a lack of jobs and housing is because there aren't enough of them, rather than that someone else has come over here to take it. The number of people who are working in the UK from the rest of Europe is about the same as the number of people from the UK working in Europe. So if you cancel those two out, as Nathan would do, what you end up with is an extra 2 million people unemployed, which isn't going to help our situation at all. We can't put up a gate on the Menai any more than we want to rebuild Offers Dyke. What we need to do is to make sure that we have the skills on the island so that our people can compete for the best jobs.
I don't think that's very generous.
I'm surprised that Nathan has mentioned immigration. I mean, I've had that mentioned to me once on the doorstep, and literally just once. There are issues, and I think that Hreen has touched on perhaps the most important ones, which is transportation. As a county councillor in Gwynedd, earlier this year I managed to get a motion through Gwynedd Council asking for the council to work with other North Wales authorities to press for the electrification of the network. It's a major issue. With regards to the North-South Air Link, again, that's been an issue, but my attitude to it is make it pay if it's going to stay. If we can't make it pay, we just can't keep it. It's unsustainable. The biggest issue I think that's not not been mentioned is tourism. It's the thing that really affects the whole island. It brings lots and lots of money in every year to the island. It could bring more if we have joined up thinking targeted at the foreign tourists, the high-spending tourists, put money into our local economy.
I agree with Steve on tourism. This is the one huge draw that Anglesey has, but only if it is quality tourism to a quality island. In other words, the effect of wind farms on the environment, the effect of more pylons despoiling the landscape would further put people off. There are specific attractions like Trackmorn, the motor racing circuit, for that specific interest, one of the biggest visitor attractions on the island, but it suffers from a lack of support from the other infrastructures of tourism like hotels and catering on the island. It's a quality product that Anglesey has to offer to visitors, and we must keep it. There's no point transporting them there better if it is despoiled.
Catherine.
It's the job of government to provide employment, whether Westminster or the Assembly, and I really think it's dangerous to speak about immigration and lead in the direction of blaming people through no fault of their own are in the area. But my main thing is not just solving unemployment, it's also demanding equality of spending on education for pupils, equal to the pupils in England. At the moment, there's a difference of £18,000 per class.
Thank you all. Let me run through the candidates you've been listening to again. Welsh Labour's candidate is Tal Michael, the Welsh Liberal Democrat Steve Churchman, Plaid Cymru Fianna Piorweth, Socialist Labour Catherine Jones, Welsh Conservative Neil Fairlam and Nathan Gill from UKIP. Thank you all for giving up your Sunday morning.